Welcome back to another video. My name is Aaron and I help people expand their consciousness. Now in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 3 mind techniques that if we use will change our lives forever. Now my intention with this video is to show you practical tools that you can apply that can change the neurology of your brain, the somatic connections of the way your brain works, to change it in a powerful way where you start to view yourself in a new way and at the same time know that your potential is far outside of the credit you've been giving yourself. Now this might sound like a big claim to change our brains forever, but the idea under neuroscience is that we have shown that when we learn something new, when we make a new connection in our brain, it changes everything about it. It changes the way that we relate to ourselves. It changes the way that our thoughts are constantly firing, and that our brain at a deeper level from moment to moment is never really the same because we are making new somatic connections. We are thinking a little bit different, so we're already changing to begin with. Now, the power in this is when we know that our brains are always changing, we can really learn how to let go of things that don't serve, to let go of stories that we tell ourselves that aren't helping us. And as we do that, we then allow ourselves to be the best version of ourselves in the present moment. Now, the first technique has to do with rewriting the story that we consistently tell ourselves. Now, when you get to the fundamental core of who we think we are and how we associate with everything in our life, it becomes very obvious that everything in our life is a certain story. We have a certain story around us and our family. We have a certain story around our potential. We have a story of the kind of relationships we're in, the kind of ways that we create money and abundance in our life. And all of these stories are serving us in the way that it keeps the perpetual loop of our identity going, that who we think we are and that story that we tell ourselves is always going to be something that we remain consistent to. Now, the idea behind this is that when we rewrite our story, when we start to look at ourselves in a completely new way, everything begins to change as a reflection. Now, what we can do in order to do this is we can start to look at ourselves in a completely new way. We can be grateful for all the experiences that we've had in our life. When we start to look at ourselves in this new way, our brain is changing because we are making new associations to our past. We are starting instead to look at our past as an accumulation of who we are now. We can start to see that as we look at ourselves more in the present moment, as we simply decide who we prefer to be, we are letting go of that past and we're allowing ourselves to embody our potential more. So the idea behind this is that there isn't a story around every single thing in your life, around every single person in your life. And sometimes our stories keep certain behaviors intact. I've realized that certain relationships in my life, that the stories I have around them keep a certain expectation there. They keep certain habitual patterns there. And sometimes if we drop the labels, everything begins to change. I used to have labels around family members being a certain way, or, having a certain level of negativity and me wanting to distance myself from them. But what I learned is the moment I dropped that story, is the moment I allowed something new to come into my life. The more I allowed to drop that expectation, and the less that person would actually embody the way I expected them to. So understand that what we can do is to drop the labels around ourselves. If we view ourselves as somebody that is shy, if we view ourselves as somebody that is lazy, those are nothing more than identities and labels that we have attached to through our story. We can change them by simply deciding to let them go, knowing that they were simply on autopilot. But now that we're aware that they're on autopilot, we can let them go and we can decide to be who we prefer to be. We can stop making there such a strong connection between our past, present, and future. We are who we choose to be in the present moment. And if we drop our story by dropping the labels, everything begins to change and you can start to look at everything in a completely new way. Now, the second mind technique has to do with changing the associations that we have in our life and starting to really embody who we prefer to be. Now, the idea behind this is understanding that our personality is creating our personal reality. Now, this isn't my quote. This is a quote from Dr. Joe Dispenza in one of his books called How to Break the Habit of Being yourself. Now, originally I saw that book, I was in a sauna at the gym, and I was like, somebody was reading it, and I was like, why would you want to break the habit of being yourself? I thought it was a very negative thing, but then I saw it was by Dr. Doughty, who is somebody that I have listened to before in TED Talks and also his lectures, and I knew that, okay, something I should pay attention to. So I read the book, and it was all about understanding that who we are being in the present moment, that the personality of who we think we are, which our personality is a composition or compilation of how we think, how we feel, and how we act. If we change these three things, which are on autopilot, which are simply things that have been on recycle, we then change the whole experience that we're getting in our life. Now, that's creating our personal reality. So what we must do is think beyond. We must go beyond what we have priorly thought. We must create new associations, and we must think greater than our current experience. Now, the easiest way I found to do this is through meditation. Because when we meditate, and literally what the word meditation means is to become familiar with. Now, to become familiar with, and the idea is that with meditation, what we can begin to do is become familiar with the kind of feelings that we prefer to experience. Become familiar and have what is called mental rehearsal. Mental rehearsal is when we envision the best version of ourselves, when we imagine how we would act, the kind of body language we would have, when we imagine the kind of feelings that we would be embodying consistently. What we begin to do is we begin to wire our brain in a similar way. We begin to literally sync our brain up with who we prefer to be, and as we do that, we are rewiring ourselves to become that. We are starting to become that personality. We are starting to really embody who we prefer to be, and the more that we do this, the more that it becomes who we are. We must think beyond, and in order to think beyond, we have to become familiar with things we're not already familiar with. We must go beyond those states by feeling within it, and at the same time, we can also take action. This is something I like to really press upon, is to do things that your normal personality wouldn't do. Maybe if you've always considered yourself a shy person, push yourself to go out. Push yourself to be around people that you haven't been around before. And as you begin to do that, you begin to change your self-image for who you think that you are, and then everything begins to change. So the idea is to, first off, what you can do is become familiar with emotions that you're normally not feeling because you're normally doing the same things every day. You're normally thinking the same thoughts. What you can then do is stretch beyond it through mental rehearsal and imagining you being that version. Feel into it, make it something you become very familiar with, and then at the same time decide to take action from that new point of view. And as you begin to do that, you are wiring in that new personality and you're becoming who you prefer to be. Now, the third technique has to do with something that is called metacognition, and I mean this in the form of observing our own thoughts. So when we normally think in the first person, it's very common to become very reactive to things that happen to us. We're thinking that this has happened to me right now. We become very responsive, which can cause stress, which can cause us to really get into a reactive frame versus being in a responsive frame. Now, the idea behind this is that when we learn how to observe our thoughts, we take our power back. We can then decide what does serve us. We can let go of what doesn't serve us. And this is something that absolutely changed my life. I remember that I was meditating and I was learning meditation. This is like 2 or 3 days into it. And I was so focused on controlling my mind, on not thinking the negative thoughts. Well, the thing is the more that I would think about not thinking negative thoughts, the more those negative thoughts would come in, the more that I would actually resist it, and the resistance would build within. What I decided to do, and I read this somewhere, was to observe the thoughts and to allow them to be there. That was the game changer. I allowed the thoughts to be there. I observed them, and as I observed them, the negative charge went away, the resistance went away, and the paradox is eventually the overthinking went away and the thoughts went away altogether. I created space within me. What happened was as I felt into that, eventually it became a feeling that I really enjoyed. I love the feeling of meditation. That's why I do it for the first 10 or 15 minutes every day for the last 5 or 6 years now. It's something that's really changed because I've been able to respond rather than react to the things that happen in my life. And then everything in life becomes a choice. Do I choose to have this habit? Do I choose to act in this way? And when we start to associate who we are being as a choice, that's where the true power begins, and that's where we have the choice over our own state of being. This technique, I think, is one of the most simple but yet powerful ideas that you can apply in your life that will change everything about you, because as you observe your thoughts, as you allow them to be there, you gain the metacognition for knowing how you think, and you gain the ability to respond rather than react. So remember that the 3 mind techniques are simple. They simply involve understanding that our story is running our life experience, that when we rewrite our story, we start to look at ourselves in a completely new way. We can drop the labels that are holding certain expectations in place, that are holding certain behaviors in place. Then secondly, we can go beyond our current limitations. We can go beyond the current thoughts, the current level of our personality, by simply feeling into the emotions that we would feel if we were in that reality now, understanding that as we take action and doing things we're not comfortable with, we become more familiar with it, and that becomes a part of who we are. That's where we create true opportunities. And then thirdly, realizing that as we become aware of what we're thinking and we learn to observe rather than react, everything will begin to change. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and also make sure that you turn on the notifications. I've heard from some people that they're not seeing the daily uploads I post, so if you want to see that, make sure you turn the notifications on. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Much love. Namaste.